So I want to show you a couple of games that I just played with the blue, white, red Miracles Rest in Peace deck, and there were certain board states that came up in those games that would seem unwinnable, and they certainly felt that way. But in those types of situations, I feel like a lot of people, kind of get dejected and want to give up. Uh, and that's understandable when you're that far behind. But I'd like to show you how I've tried to play through those scenarios myself, and typically this is what I do during tournaments as well. And hopefully this is something that you can learn from, and also can maybe provide criticism and just go over the plays. So. This is a tournament practice room match, so it's not like we're playing for high stakes or anything, but the games are still fairly well played, and they were interesting. So let's take a look. My opening hand has 4 lands: Rest in Peace, Jace, and Brainstorm. And I have a basic, so I'm not susceptible to Wasteland. If I'm playing against Rug, this hand is fairly strong because it has a Rest in Peace, and it has 4 lands. Granted, 3 of them are susceptible to different kinds of hate. Like the Flooded Strand can be stifled, so you have to play around Stifle. Or if they play, for example, a creature on turn 1, then you can run out the Flooded Strand, fetch right away to get, let's say, a Plains. Then you're automatically playing around Wasteland and Stifle. But you also have an Island, so you can run that out. And if you're just playing against something that doesn't look like Rug, and wait. I wouldn't run out the Celestial Colonnade right away because there's no need for that. You really don't need it in play that early. And the mana for playing Jason turn 4, I think we have 4 turns to draw it. Plus we have a Brainstorm that we may want to cash in before then. If, for example, we're playing against something that Rest in Peace is not good against, we can just shuffle that away. So I don't think leading with Celestial Colonnade is good. Leading with Caracas is also pretty bad because then you're just setting yourself up for number 1, getting the rest and not being able to Brainstorm in response, Wasteland, and it just doesn't do anything for you. I mean, the only thing that Caracas could do is if they play a creature and then you naturally Terminus it and you actually want to Terminus it. Like the only creature you want to probably Terminus on turn 1, I would say, is either from Rug or from like a Deathrite Shaman. Mother of Runes, I wouldn't Terminus at all because you want to set up a bigger board, and they want to set up a bigger board, and then you can Terminus them. So I'm probably going to lead here with the Island against an unknown opponent most of the time, just because it gives me a chance to play, around the duress and also protects me from Wasteland and Stifle. So here he opens up Island, Sensei Stop. At this point, I'm thinking he's playing the Mirror Match most likely. So that's a really good opening in the Mirror because you get card quality, you get filtering, and if I don't open up with the top and they open up with the top, I'm really far behind at this point. Also, the other thing that you have to fear when this happens is they just have the natural top counterbalance, assembled. So I want to hit a Force of Will really bad now because otherwise, if he has top and I don't, or if I hit a top, I'm okay too, but I would be really far behind. So I Brainstorm in response, and I hit land, top. So that's a really bad Brainstorm, except for the fact that I hit top. And it's also not very recommended to Brainstorm this way, but in this situation, I feel like I have to spend my mana wisely. I also have a bunch of dead cards if this is the Mirror, like I don't want the Rest in Peace. But I'm still not certain that this is the Mirror, so I keep the Rest in Peace because it's better than another land. And potentially, I can Brainstorm it away down the line. So here, since I already know that I have, I'm drawing a land, I'm, shuffling it away with a fetch line and trying to play my own top. Since I don't know what deck he's playing, and I'm assuming it's the Mirror, I'd still rather be safe than sorry because I already have all my colors. So, since I have all my colors, there's no point to not get basics here. I mean, if he is playing some kind of funky, like, Bant deck with Knight of Reliquary and Wasteland, and for some reason he has top in there, or, who knows, right? So there's no reason not to get greedy and to not get, the basics here. So I played the top. Maybe he has days. I don't know what he's playing for sure. Hoping that it resolves. My opponent forces it with Brainstorm. So at that point, I'm putting him on, probably a counterbalance deck most likely. And, I'm feeling really bad right now, obviously, because, you're so far behind. Opponent has top. He forces your top. I got a basic, which doesn't really matter. But if it's the mirror, then you obviously want to get the non-basics because there's no cost to doing so. So I'm just praying he doesn't play the counterbalance. Opponent, for some reason, goes to second main phase, making you feel like, oh, he missed the land drop. Maybe he's playing, that game where you would, oh, they didn't make their land drop, so you have 6. And then he just goes and plays his spell second main phase. And then you don't have enough time to, like, F3 and spell pierce it. So I think that that's kind of a little bit of gamesmanship on Moto. But other than that, there's really no reason to do that. So he has, the nut draw. He has the forcible for my top, turn 1 top, turn it to counterbalance. So at this point, like most people would just pack it in the mirror because usually what would happen is if you don't pack it in this situation and your opponent is not completely brain dead, you're probably going to time yourself out in the match. So what eventually will happen is they'll eventually assemble enough cards and lands because they have top and counterbalance and you don't, that they'll play Jace or they'll resolve something like even Vendilion Click and they will beat you down with it. And you're going to waste all this time trying to play around the counterbalance and top, and you're going to, probably lose like 30 minutes in game 1. Considering how slow both of these decks really are, there's really very few ways to free win besides Rest in Peace, Helm, and like Miracling a huge Entreat, and then them having no answer. That if you waste 30 minutes in the mirror on game 1, then you're not favored to win the match. The best case scenario is you're probably going to draw the match because the second game is probably going to be long as well. People bring in more answers. And even if you win the second game, third game, you might have like 5 to 10 minutes for the third game. So it's very important to watch your clock in these types of scenarios. And conceding is not the worst idea in the world. I have a Jace in my hand, so I have a glimmer of hope to resolve the Jace. And I'm feeling like, well, I might play on just to see kind of what his deck, how he wins. Is it the Rest in Peace version? Is he just, just to see what it is? So I know how to sideboard. Plus, this is a low-stakes game, so I'm trying to see how I can play through these scenarios. We're not in a tournament where timing out is going to be a concern. At this point, I'm just basically hoping that I draw something relevant and he doesn't. So at this point, I'm hoping basically that he taps out, does not have Jace on top or 4-drop, and I get to play my Jace and it resolves, and I brainstorm myself out of this really bad game state, maybe by setting up, Entreat, because, Entreat can only be really countered by Spell Pierce or Forcible, and, kind of hopefully come back from there. Plus, I feel like if he plays Jace and I have Celestial Colonnade and he doesn't have swords or a way to terminus it, I can kind of pester his Jace and hope to come back. The chances of me winning this game, I would say, in this type of board state are probably 15% maximum, probably less. So I'm just kind of playing through. At this point, I realize he's on Rest in Peace, so I have another out now to just kind of play Helm and Helm him if he doesn't have a Helm. And I now have to actually watch what I Forcible because if you can just play Helm, he'll win immediately. So obviously, I read the Rest in Peace resolve. There's no point fighting, over that. So I go for the Jace because I feel like if I give him more time to just top and set up the top, then it's going to get much worse for me because he's going to eventually have more mana to top and he's going to be able to Spell Pierce since he obviously didn't leave up a blue, which I think he definitely should have left up a blue there. I think he mistapped to at least try to represent Spell Pierce, but he didn't, so it kind of made me want to go for it. If he was playing the mirror usually has between 1 to 3 Spell Pierces. So here it feels really good at least that he doesn't have a Jace on top or a Helm because otherwise he would have just revealed that. So I'm realizing now that he's drawing a blue card, obviously, for Forcible because there's no other reason to do that. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about it. I didn't want to wait another turn to try to draw a blue card naturally for the Forcible because letting them untap with counterbalance top is really bad for me. So that's why I went for the Jace, and he Forcibles and pitches Spell Pierce, which is terrible for him because he mistapped, and if he didn't mistap, he could have Spell Pierce. So here's the first situation where the opponent made a mistake, which helped me, I guess, get a little bit of cards out of him and hope to come back, which also, when your opponents do that, you kind of start to know that they're not very familiar with playing their deck, or they think that they're so far ahead that nothing can go wrong. And it's one of those situations when you're that really far ahead in the game, you should really try to ask yourself, how can I lose this game? And making a mistake like that, like leaving the Mystic Gate instead of an island to play, instead of just tapping these two or even leaving the Tundra. Uh, but I'll probably leave the island just in case they have a wasteland that waste me and whatever, right? So I think that just kind of shows that he hasn't played the deck enough, and he doesn't think like, how can I even lose now? I have counterbalance top. How can I lose? So game goes on. Obviously, I can't punish him to force his top here. He plays the top. He has 2 mana, so I know he doesn't have lands. He has 1 card. I'm thinking that it could be Swords to Plowshares because if it was Brainstorm, he may have ran it out. It could be Spell Pierce, but I don't think so because if you have 2 Spell Pierces in your hand, you're probably not going to misstep your lands like that because the only cards that you could play are Spell Pierces. You're going to think about it. Okay, I'm just going to leave out blue. So I don't think it's a Spell Pierce. It could be Terminus. It could be Intrigued Angels. It could be, maybe another Rest in Peace, or maybe another Counterbalance, or maybe a Jace. Definitely no lands. Definitely, I don't think he has a Jace, and I don't think he has Helm. He could be Vendilion Click. It could be that. Maybe he's waiting for 4 lands. So I draw a blue card here for Force of Will. I obviously cannot run out the Brainstorm because it's just going to get countered. Plus, I need to sit back on my Force of Will and try not to lose to the Helm at this point. Or if I draw Helm myself, I want to push it through. Or if I draw Jace, I'm going to try to push it through as well. So he still doesn't make a land drop and passes a turn. That's him not doing anything is really good for me here, especially since he's not making land drops because it's giving me time and he's not doing anything. And eventually, I may be able to start attacking if I actually think that he doesn't have swords, or I'm in a really bad situation where I have to attack. Plus, playing the Colonnade there means if he goes Jace, he has to Fate Seal at that point. Otherwise, I just get to eat his Jace for free. And even if he doesn't Fate Seals me, there's a chance he puts something on the bottom. Plus, I get to ding his Jace down to 1. So at that point, it's not very. He's never going to unsummon anything, and Vendilion Click could kill it if I flash it in at the end of turn. So. Or I can attack it again with Celestial Colonnade if he doesn't have swords. So now I have 2 Force of Wills. I can counter one, just straight up paying 5 mana, and the next one I can, pitch the Brainstorm and hope he doesn't have a 5 on top. So now he fetched. So I'm thinking, okay, the dude fetched. He's obviously going for like a Jace here or Helm. Because why else would you fetch? I mean, yeah, granted, maybe his top cards were all like 3 Rest in Peace or something, but when you have counterbalance top, your fetch lands are insane. So you don't want to just fetch for the sake of fetching. You want to fetch because you got a plan. You're going to play a spell, and you need that mana. So let's see what he does. He just passes the turn. So at that point, I'm thinking, okay, he fetched. He didn't like his top 3. He didn't play a spell. He has 2 cards in hand. So I'm thinking he must have like a Vendilion Click because it doesn't make any other sense. Like he wants to have the ability to top, a chance to counter my spell. So he probably didn't have a Force of Will. He probably didn't have a 2 on top, so it wasn't Rest in Pieces because the only things that can answer Vendilion Click here are Force of Will and Counterspell. So he probably didn't have a 2 or a 5, so he wanted to fetch to try to get a 2 or a 5 on top, or a 4, because if I counter his Vendilion Click, that's the same as him getting that information kind of and getting, let's say, a Force of Will or Counterspell out of my hand. So he may potentially already have the Helm or the Jace. He's just trying to set it up by clicking me. So I'm thinking he has Click here. I go to draw my card. He doesn't do anything. I draw, a pretty useless Enlightened Tutor. All my 1-drops are pretty. I consider 1-drops to be turned off when there's this combo in play, and I just kind of keep them in my hand instead of wasting them because all it's going to do is just going to make him use 1 mana. Now, if I think that he doesn't have a 1-drop on top, like if the situation is that dire, then I can run it out, make him, draw with the top. Let's say Brainstorm, he's going to go to draw with the top, and in response, I can Enlightened Tutor and set up some type of a play where I can O-ring his counterbalance or whatever, right? So, but at this point, I don't feel like it. Also, I don't want to attack here because I think he has Vendilion Click, and I want to be able to just hardcast a Force of Will instead of having to pitch one. And also, if he does have swords in his hand, which I'm not sure yet because he hasn't played a spell, so I don't know what could be in his hand. I don't want to get my Celestial Colonnade sorted because there's just no point to do that right now. I want to put him on the clock, but I also don't want to lose the game, and I feel like having 2 Force of Wills right now is what I need. And maybe if I draw another land or something like that, then I can consider attacking. So he tops again using Mystic Gate and passes the turn. He doesn't do anything, so I'm starting to think he either doesn't have a way to counter my counterspell, which he probably puts me on force of will at this point, and does have the click, but is waiting to have a 5 on top or something like that, or he's just hoping to get some cards out of my hand and then go for it. So but I have nothing going on, so I'm just being patient. So I draw another land, which is nice, but I still don't want to attack. I don't really have a way to protect myself if I do attack with 2 force of wills. So he plays click here. So I think this is a good time for him to play click because it makes me have to force or counterspell it. He may have a 2 or a 5 on top, and even if I do, he basically says, you got to have another counterspell because I'm going to go for either Jace or I'm going to go for Helm next turn and have a land, and you're just dead basically. So at this point, I just have to hardcast Force of Will, and I'm going to tap the Caracas because I have no intentions if he counters all this stuff to ever bounce the Mendelian Click because I can't win that way at all. And then I'm going to tap the Caracas because what if he plays Caracas? I don't want to have a dead land just, go to the graveyard right away. So I hardcast the Force of Will, pray that he doesn't have a 5, so he shows me Detention Sphere, and he draws the Detention Sphere. So now I know his hand has Detention Sphere in it. Potentially Swords to Plowshares and something that I don't know about. So we play on. I don't fetch, obviously, or brainstorm because there's no point to do that. I draw a top, which I also am not going to play. At this point, I'm just waiting to draw a little bit more protection and maybe have him go for the Helm and me counter it because the deck usually just plays 1 Helm. But yeah, this situation is really bad. Like most of the times you want to concede in the situations you feel terrible. I have Celestial Colony, which kind of gives me that hope of like, maybe if he taps out and does something stupid and I counter it and I start attacking him, and I don't know. I just, I could also draw my own Detention Sphere and get his counterbalance and then set up my own counterbalance. So like I have this like glimmer of hope here, which is why I'm not giving up. He's not doing anything on this turn. I draw counterspell. So okay. So now I have a way to, attack, activate Colonnade, try to attack. If he lets me attack, then I can actually get to tap it and sacrifice Scalding Tarn to counterspell and still have Force of Will Brainstorm up. So I have to go for it because I feel like the longer, I have protection now, and the longer the game goes, it's not going to get better for me. Also, at this point, if he has swords, he has swords. I'm going to let him, counter or plow it. I'm not going to fight over that because then I have Force of Will, and then next turn I'll have another counterspell with just straight up counterspell. So I attack, and I think it's a mistake here that he makes is that he actually lets me attack. Because if you have Terminus on top instead of Swords to Plowshares, because he obviously doesn't have swords because he started topping, at least that's what I think, then you want to Terminus it before I get to attack, because then if I want to actually fight over it, I don't get to attack. But if you let me attack, since he has Vigilance, I get to use it for mana as well. So he lets me attack, which is a mistake, and Terminus is it. At this point, I feel like I have to fight for it because he doesn't have Swords to Plowshares. And also, he puts his top on top, so I know that my counterspell is going to most likely resolve unless he's obviously he's representing counterspell here, and he doesn't have it. Also, now we know that he didn't have the second Spell Pierce because he definitely would have pierced here at the time that he had 1 Spell Pierce. So we kind of get a little bit of information. So we know that he has the Detention Sphere and 2 other cards that we don't know about. So he potentially has Helm here. Maybe Jason was just playing very carefully around it, hoping I would tap out. So at this point, I'm basically forcing Jace or Helm. Everything else I'm pretty much not forcing. Okay, so I forced the top. Why I forced the top? Because I feel like he doesn't have the second top because he had a lot of time to play it and still have a lot of mana. So I feel like if I force his top and he still doesn't have a Force of Will on top, and he plays a Helm here, for example, or a Jace will be the worst, obviously. But if he plays a Helm and doesn't have that other land, which we know that he has a land on top now, then I know that his top card is a land now. So I could like Enlightened Tutor for my own Helm, for example. If he plays Jace on, say, Brainstorms, I can Enlighten Tutor, and he doesn't put a 1 on top. In the upkeep, I can Enlighten Tutor for a Helm, and using his own Rest in Peace, I can just kill him. So this is a really good situation for me. Obviously, I get lucky that he doesn't have a Spell Pierce or straight up hard counter spell the last turn, or he bricks on top, etc. So so he goes for a 4-drop, and it's a Helm. At this point, I realize unless his last card is Force of Will and the Detention Sphere, and he just didn't want to force any of those things back for some reason, he thinks he's just going to win with the Helm, I realize I'm going to win. Also, if you notice the way I've played my game, if you look at my graveyard, there's nothing here that tells him that I'm playing Rest in Peace and Helm. really, that is one reason you don't want to run out cards like this or this, because if you have that outside shot to not tell them that you're playing that and you're probably going to lose the game anyway, then don't tell them, because they won't know how to sideboard against you. Maybe they'll just sideboard against, like, they'll think that you're just a blue-white deck, with Jace and counter spells, probably counterbalance because you have top. So since I don't show it to him, I go for it on the upkeep. I go to Enlightened Tutor. It obviously resolves. He shows me the Tundra. I go ahead and get Helm, play the Helm, and he concedes. So this is a good situation. This is a good example, not a situation, a good example of how you can, win the game when your opponent is impatient and potentially, misplaced by not leaving the mana to spell pierce, etc. But I think it's very important that there's lessons here to be learned, that you can still outmaneuver these types of combos, because people either are not experienced or they feel like they're so far ahead that they're going to just crush you, and regardless of what they do. And sometimes it does happen, but sometimes you get lucky and they reveal Tundra on top and they don't have a Force of Will and they don't have a counter spell, and you just get there. So by me inducing an attack there and tapping out, it made him feel comfortable enough to play the Helm of Obedience and try to get me next turn. And I obviously got lucky he didn't have a land in hand, but I also think that he would have played it. So, the turn before, because he, missed land drops a couple of turns there. So I'm not quite sure what his last card in hand is. It could have been Entreat. It could have been the Terminus. It definitely wasn't a Spell Pierce or Swords to Plowshares or a Force of Will or a Counter Spell. It definitely wasn't Jace, because I think he would have played Jace long ago. This potentially could have been, like a Venser or Vendilion Click, but most likely it's Terminus or another Counterbalance, maybe another Rest in Peace. So anyways, this was a pretty interesting game one, and I'm obviously very lucky to win. But just a good example of don't always just give up when you're in these situations. So I'm going to show you game two in a minute now. All right, so here's game two after sideboarding. I brought in some Red Blasts. I took out all the Terminuses and all of my Swords to Plowshares because I feel like that's not the battle that I want to fight. So like if he has a Vendilion Click, I'd rather Red Blast it or even force it if I have to, than Swords it or set up some kind of Terminus versus an Entreat. I did bring in Engineer Explosives just to kind of hedge against any kind of counterbalances that I can Sunburst into for 3 or whatever mana, and to make 2 colors or whatever, and also to kill his angels if he has them. But that's not I don't really want to fight with Swords to Plowshares. I kept the Force of Wills in because I feel like on the draw I think you have to keep some of them in, and I just didn't want my Swords and Terminus, because on the draw you don't want them to have the busted turn 1 top, turn 2 counterbalance. So you want to have as many ways to fight that as possible, especially turn 1 top. So he's on the play. I'm on the draw. This is a hand. So I kept the Helm, but I took out all the Rest in Pieces. The reason I kept the Helm is because it's a way for you to win if they do go Rest in Peace. Plus, it's a good way to another card to reveal to counterbalance and get his Jace off the table. If you have counterbalance going, you want to have 4 drops because usually the matchup revolves around Jace, and you just want to have ways to kind of deal with that. Plus, he has an outside shot of kind of like getting rid of some cards from your opponent if he has a top. You can kind of, if you play the Helm, you can mill his top 2 cards so he doesn't have a good top setup and try to resolve the spell. So there's other applications with this card. It's not great, obviously, but I didn't feel like a Swords to Plowshares was any better. So this hand lets me fight a counterbalance on turn 2 or my turn 1. And lets me fight a top on turn 0 or turn 1 for him, so I keep it. I have 3 lands also, which is nice. In the control mirror, you want to make your land drops, so I keep it. He goes for the top. Obviously has the turn 1 top again. It's a no-brainer. Force of Will. You have to fight for the top in this matchup. I think that card is probably way more important than counterbalance overall, because it's just so much selection and the games are going to go long. You want to limit that as much as possible. So at this point, I'm just going to play either. So the dilemma here is what happens if you draw top. I think if you draw top in the situation, you slam it 100% of the time, because even there is a chance they're going to go turn 2 counterbalance, and that's going to be a beating. The thing is, if you resolve top, you're automatically a favorite in that game, because you get to start filtering, you get to start looking for your good spells. While they have a counterbalance, which is nice, but you could deal with the counterbalance. You could play around it since they don't have top, for example, in the situation, and he showed me he doesn't have a force of will. Then I feel pretty good about that. Alternatively, he could have a force of will, and maybe he just has another top, and he's like, "Okay, sure, force my top. I'll just play another one." Sometimes you draw the 2 or 3 tops, and you're just like, "Sure, force away." So, unfortunately, I draw a Jace, which is not bad, but it doesn't do anything for me here. So obviously, I just sit back on the red blast. All right, so let's see what happens here. So he doesn't have the counterbalance, or he has a spell pierce that he wants to push it through with, or he has a red blast and he wants to, try to get my force of will if he thinks I have one. But since he doesn't play a spell, and it doesn't make any sense to me right now what he may have. I'm assuming he probably has a weird hand like this, and he just sitting back and was hoping that top was going to get there, which he probably would have if I didn't have a force of will. So I draw explosives, which gives me a way to kind of fight both the angels and the counterbalance here, since I don't have my own if he goes to play it. So he goes for Stoneforge Mystic. At this point, I realized that he probably is much more ready for the mirror match than I am, because he knew that I would take out my removal spells most likely, and he probably thought, okay, well, Rest in Peace and Helm is way too dangerous. I just lost a game playing my own Rest in Peace and Helm. I'm going to bring in the man package. And I'm assuming he doesn't have the man package main, because there's just no way you can have space for Stoneforge Mystic and Rest in Peace and Counterbalance all in the main deck. So I'm assuming he has like 4 Stoneforges and some equipment in the board, and he just brings it in for the control mirrors. So at this point, I'm like, holy crap, I'm just going to lose to Stoneforge Mystic plus, whatever equipment he gets here, because my only way to deal with these guys right now is this explosives, bounce whatever. If he gets a Batter's Call, try to bounce the token and then try to fight through it that way. Maybe get a Venser, or I mean, it's really bad for me right now. So I'm like, oh man, I misboarded. I really kind of now wish I had some swords in my deck, etc., etc. So feeling really bad right now. So he goes and gets Batter's Call, which is probably a lot better for me than if he gets like sort of Feast and Famine or something insane like that. So I draw another land. At this point, I feel like I'm just going to play the Engineered Explosives. Like, I could wait another turn, but I don't think if he goes, like, land, counterbalance, and then he can, put in the Stoneforge, then, or he has a Brainstorm then to set up, where I can't Engineer Explosives away his stuff, that it's going to be really bad for me. I don't think he has counterbalance, but he may have a land and he can top deck a counterbalance. Plus, he could have a Brainstorm here or a Spell Pierce, and I feel like if he has a Spell Pierce, I'm okay if he kills this, because at least maybe my Jace will resolve next turn. Plus, the situation is really bad for me, so I kind of have to make these types of dangerous moves. He could have a way to remove it, like he could have, the stupid, O-ring or whatever, and just O-ring on his turn, but then he doesn't put in Batter's Call. So I'm okay with this, because I'm just so far behind at this point on the board. He doesn't counter it, and I think, he must have an answer. He plays Mountain, which is kind of interesting because not many decks actually play the Mountain. This kind of makes me think that he's playing Joe Bass kind of version, but Joe Bass did not run the Rest in Peace in the Helm, but Joe Bass did have a Mountain in the sideboard, I believe. So he disenchants. So he, you realize that he brings in disenchant, and since I brought in a disenchant as well, that's another way I can deal with his equipment. So I have some outs. So he disenchants it here, which is nice since he has only a Mountain, so he can't put in the Batter's Call, so he has to attack. So I get a free turn of not taking 4. And tap, and I think here's the decision point. Do I just go for the Jace, bounce Stoneforge? But he has a red and a blue, and so he could have a Spell Pierce or a Red Blast, and it would be really bad for me. I think that I have to start trying to get some free spells out of him by counterbalance, and then I go counterbalance, and the next turn I try to Jace, and there's a chance that my counterbalance will hit his spell. Plus, if it has Spell Pierce or Force of Will, I can fight it with Red Blast if I draw land. So I just go for the counterbalance here and cross my fingers. Usually they don't have 2 disenchants, and he's probably just so he has a land. So yeah, so I was just saying, like, they don't usually have 2 disenchants, so he's probably going to main phase the Stoneforge because he doesn't want me to untap and click him in response, which is a good play on his part. So he goes Batter's Call, and he has 3 mana up, and he just, I'm like thinking, okay, well, is he going to O-ring my counterbalance? Like, what is he going to do now? Does he have Mendelian Click? What does he have? So usually when people think about Mendelian Click, they're either very experienced in playing the format, or they have the card in their own hand and it's kind of like a tell, like, oh, I have Mendelian Click. What if my opponent had Mendelian Click, and they just click me in response of to my Stoneforge activation? So sometimes you can think like, oh, maybe he has the click because he played this way, because it reminded him to play that way. Because the natural way is to just wait till the end of the turn, so that way your token can't get jaced. But this shows me that he knows about Mendelian Click and he kind of expected in the mirror, so he may have played the mirror enough. So, anyways, untap, draw Force of Will, feel like there's no way I can beat this combination. Don't have any Terminus or Swords. Need to basically rip something. So I just basically go for the Jace because I feel like I already misboarded. I'm really far behind. Things are not getting better for me. I just have to basically jam it here. But I don't. So I don't know why I didn't jam Jace. I'm assuming that I'm still hoping to get another blue card for Force of Will or try to get his Jace with a Red Blast. Plus, he also had the red up, so maybe because of that I didn't jam the Jace. So I kind of maybe, I don't know. I'm thinking maybe I have another turn here before I have to actually do something. So he plays Jace. So I have a Red Blast for it, which is nice. But he leaves up the 2 blue, so I know he doesn't have a Red Blast unless he mistapped again. So I'm thinking he has Counterspell or Spell Pierce, which there's not much I can do about it unless I draw a blue card. My best cards on top, 3 other Jaces, and a Venser. So I'm hoping that it's one of those. If not, I hope it's a blue card or a land, because it'll let me play Jace with protection with a Red Blast. And it's a Venser, so I get super lucky, just get to free roll his Jace. And it also gives me an out now to the Batterskull, because I can kind of tempo it and then try to fight it that way. And I hope to draw Caracas or something. So I'm actually going to draw the Venser and try to play Jace. And worst case scenario is that, he counters. I know I'm not drawing a land now, and I have to pitch the Venser, but I have a Jace, and at least it gives me some glimmer of hope to try to come back in this game. So I draw the Venser, and I just, I'm like, whatever, dude, you have it, you got me, maybe I'll counterbalance you for free, maybe I won't. So I go for the Jace, and, with the full intent to Force the Will if he does anything. So he goes in response in Lighten Tutor, which is very strange, but at the same time it makes sense, because if I Fate Seal the card that's on top, then, put it on the bottom, then he just gets to kill Jace because he can just attack it with these 2 dudes. He also maybe wanted to see if I have a 1 on top, because if I do, then he can Spell Pierce it. Maybe his last card is Spell Pierce, and then if I don't have a 1-drop, he gets to Spell Pierce the Jace, or he can get an answer to the Jace like that stupid O-Ring, So I reveal a Plains, obviously. He gets to the Tension Sphere, and so here I'm going for kind of a tempo play, because I don't really have a good play. I could put this on the bottom, but if I'm so far behind that I just basically need him to waste time, trying to equip the Batterskull or return it and put it into play. But most likely he's basically has to decide, does he want to do Tension Sphere to make counterbalance, or does he want to equip Batterskull and kill Jace? And I want to give him that opportunity. So he knows his stuff is going to resolve anyway, because I already showed him Plains. So I want to give him the opportunity to make that decision. Because if he lets my Jace live, I think it's really good for me. But if he doesn't, that means he's not playing the Tension Sphere or my counterbalance. So this is also really interesting, because he knows I have Venser, and I know that he has the Tension Sphere plus some random card which I don't know about. And it's probably not Force of Will, but it could be. Since he got another blue card to kind of hedge against it. So here, he's attacking Jace, which is going to die. But now, if he attacks again, I can bounce his Batterskull and eat the Stoneforge. So it's going to be interesting what he does next turn. So Jace obviously dies. I draw the Plains. And then I'm just going to pass turn. Because not only do I have Force of Will, I also have Red Blast and Venser. So I'm feeling pretty good about my chances, at least, to kind of try to get somewhere in this game now. So he has 3 cards, 2 unknowns on the Tension Sphere. He goes for the attack. So at this point, I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave up a Red Blast. I'm going to Venser back your Batterskull, and I'm going to try to eat the Stoneforge. Which, if that resolves, then what he should be doing is just, since it has Vigilance, is just putting the Batterskull back in right away. Even though I do get to eat the Stoneforge, he should still at least save the batter skull and put it back in. So he at this point he has the Force of Will, so he probably got the Attention Sphere to kind of get a blue card also, which is awesome kind of for me because I'm like, okay, well now Attention Sphere is not going to get my counterbalance, it's not going to get my Venser next turn, etc. And also I'm like, okay, my Red Blast can probably get his Force unless he has a Pierce, which I don't think he does, etc. So because he would have pierced my Jace last turn. So I Red Blast, and I also reveal a Brainstorm, so I have a 1-drop on top to his Force of Will. So I Red Blast, I bounce his Batter Skull, and he lets me block, and he does not activate it to put the Batter Skull back in. I think he's just dejected or just forgot that he could do that because he has Vigilance. And he didn't try to play the Batter Skull, which I think is a huge mistake. So I don't understand what he could have in his hand at this point, except maybe another Force of Will. And he's like, okay, I'm so scared, I have to force it. That's the only thing that makes sense why he didn't put in the Batter Skull is he has another Force of Will, and he feels like he has to counter whatever I play here, which is probably Jace in his mind. Which is insane, because he saw that I have a Brainstorm on top, which is probably bad news for him if a Brainstorm will counterbalance. So I'm assuming he has Force of Will plus Batter Skull here. I just attack him down and say go. Have Brainstorm. And here he goes for the Batter Skull, realizing that I don't have Jace because I would have probably played it there. Which, he may have also drawn the blue card for his Force of Will now. So I go Brainstorm because I'm planning to put the Force of Will back on top. And he has the Spell Pierce. So he must have drawn the Spell Pierce, so he doesn't have a Force of Will. Because if he has Force of Will here, I think the right place to just Force. He knows I drew the Force. You have to Force here because Spell Pierce has a lot more chances that I have a 1 than a 5 on top. So I don't know what he has in his hand at this point. Could be a land, I guess. So I reveal, a top blindly, and then I Brainstorm, put the Force of Will on top to get his Batter Skull. Obviously, get super lucky. And I'm about to assemble Tron. I'm going to play the land. I'm going to play the top. Have Force of Will Brainstorm up. Basically, and I put my Helm on top. So Jace protection. The only thing he can do is probably play on the Stoneforge, but his Batter Skull is dead, so I don't know what he's going to get. He goes for the counterbalance. It's his last card in hand. At that point, I feel like I'm just going to look for another card on top and then probably counter it. And I have Jaces, so now I just know that if I counter the counterbalance, there's no way my Jace doesn't resolve. And if my Jace resolves, I feel like I'm a heavy favorite to win from this board state, which took a couple of bad plays from my opponent for me to get there. But I also get lucky and get an retreat, so I'm protected from 3s and 4s. So put both 3 and 4 on top, play my land, attack him, and just feel like I can't lose at this point. See what my opponent does. He's trying to play through it. I guess he could have like a huge entreat, and he thinks that's going to get there probably, which he probably will if he has an entreat here and I don't have any way to answer it. What am I going to do? He probably thinks that I don't have Terminuses, I don't have, EEs in the graveyard, etc. So he obviously rips a Geist Insane Trap, which would have been really good here because it would mean that I have to Fate Seal him with Jace and then trade my Venser for his Geist when he attacks, which is the most he could hope for in a situation like this. So I have the nuts, I have Click. Well, I was already going to counter it anyway with the Entreat, but I also have Click now, so I just show him the Entreat because I plan on fully Entreating and then Fate Sealing him on my turn just to put it away as fast as possible. And I'm going to keep 1 mana up, obviously, just so I can have some counterbalance action going. I Fate Seal him, and I think I see like a counterbalance or something like that, and I let him have it, and the game ends. Yeah, he has a counterbalance, and the game ends. So basically, I got really lucky in this game that, number one, I was able to get Venser. That is like probably one of my only good outs, besides Jace bouncing and hoping that somehow get there with a large entreat or something. And then I think he also played a little suboptimally by not putting the Batter Skull back in. I think his board plan is probably better than mine because he has the Geists and the Stoneforges. So this is something to consider in this matchup, is that people are going to get crafty like that. They know you take out their removal, and they can get you. But anyways, I think this was a pretty good example of how to play through tough board states and what your mindset should be like, and what you need to think about how you can come back from those board states. You have to start thinking about, what are my outs? How do I craft the board in the game state to actually have my outs be relevant? And sometimes you have to obviously get lucky and get those outs, but you have to play to those outs, and hope that your opponent makes mistakes, and give them, as many decision points as possible without jeopardizing your plan. You know, so yeah, overall, I think that these games were pretty fortunate for me, but I also was able to play through very difficult board states that would seem unwinnable almost, and get a little bit of luck to help with that. So, anyways, I just wanted to share this video with you guys. I think it's pretty educational, because I know that we've all been there and didn't get there in those types of board states, but sometimes you do, and you just kind of have to understand how to play through them.